South Carolina's most high-profile murder cases ever, the state Supreme Court overturned the murder convictions of Alex Murdaugh. In 2023, Murdaugh was convicted of murdering his wife, Maggie, and youngest son, Paul. The case generated massive media attention, from podcasts to multiple TV series and documentaries. CNN's Diane Gallagher has been covering this since the beginning. Diane, of course, I want you to tell us about this decision, but if you could, since this is inside politics, weave in the impact on the governor's race, because the state attorney general is one of the candidates.
He's considered to be one of the leading candidates in the gubernatorial race, and there's at least one competitor who is already out with a statement on this. But I want to get to what Attorney General Alan Wilson, who was in the courtroom with us for much of those 6 weeks of the Murdaugh trial back in 2023. Alan Wilson said, quote, "While we respectfully disagree with the court's decision, my office will aggressively seek to retry Alex Murdaugh for the murders of Maggie and Paul as soon as possible. Let me be clear, this decision does not mean Murdaugh will be released. He will remain in prison for his financial crimes. No one is above the law, and as always, we will continue to fight for justice." Now, that is important because the court, of course, reverses the verdicts and vacates the sentences, but then it remands it back to the circuit court. So it is the Attorney General office's decision on whether they retry this case again, and that has been discussion leading up to us waiting for this decision. Now, Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who is also a GOP candidate for governor in South Carolina, noted, quote, "South Carolina managed to bungle the biggest murder trial in the state's history. This is what happens when no one is ever held accountable. South Carolina's justice system is broken. Victims have no faith the criminals will ever go to jail. Our state has given them no reason to. As governor, I will change that." Now, look, the High Court of South Carolina explicitly laid blame not on the state attorneys or defense attorneys or anybody, but at the feet of the former Colleton County Clerk of Court, Becky Hill. The justices say that she engaged in, quote, "shocking jury interference," and they noted it was, in their opinion, outside the knowledge of the outstanding trial judge and, quote, "superbly competent and professional counsel for the state and Murdaugh." Now, look, you may remember there was an evidentiary hearing before where they determined that she made some improper comments like watch his body language, but did not influence the verdict. The High Court does not agree with that and said that it did, and therefore violated Alex Murdaugh's constitutional right to a fair trial. We will see what as soon as possible means for getting this together. It, of course, would be very expensive and potentially difficult to find a venue in South Carolina.
Let's discuss with prosecutor turned defense attorney Joey Jackson. Joey, always great to see you. Remind us what this county clerk said to jurors that has now upended the murder convictions.
Yeah, it was pretty significant, Bar. It's good to be with you. So now the county clerk, remember, is a person who pretty much oversees the jury. Whenever there's a jury trial, you have a jury clerk, which you call, or we'll call you, hey, we're starting late today. What are the lunch orders going to be? They pretty much oversee. And the reason I mention that, Bars, is because they develop, somewhat of a rapport, and they certainly have credibility because they're the extension of the judge. And when you have a person of that magnitude who's connected to the judge making rulings, talking about watch his body language, he's lying to you, he's misrepresenting, this is not going to take long, when you go and deliberate, and in terms of the jurors deliberating and finding him guilty, and making other comments like that, which are clear in your suggestion that he is guilty, you shouldn't believe a word he says, it's all in his demeanor, that's not good. And so the issue when you have a clerk like this, or any court personnel, in this instance it was the clerk, Ms. Hill, when you have a person doing that and introducing information to the jury, obviously it has an impact. And in the event that it doesn't have an impact, it's still problematic. But the court essentially found as follows: that directly goes against the right to a fair trial. We hold that as sacrosanct in this country. You have a right to a fair trial. And you can't have a right to a fair trial when you have the very clerk in the court in which the case is being held and heard saying things like this. And so that's the essence of what she said. And as a result of that, the court said, hey, it impaired the jury. There's a presumption that what you said to the jury was prejudicial, affected the outcome of the case, and we've got to do this again.
So, Joey, it's not as if Murdaugh is going to just walk free tomorrow, right? He separately pleaded guilty to dozens of financial crimes, and he's serving concurrent state and federal sentences of 27 and 40 years for those. Does this ruling at all impact those sentences?
So it does not. Those are separate as we look there. So he was in a world of legal trouble, both from a state perspective and a federal perspective, of course, with the state 27 years, the federal government the 40 years. So that certainly is not impaired or impacted at all. And so he's not going to get out. He's not going anywhere as a result of this. I should also say that there's another case that could be pursued against him, relating to a suicide attempt in which he paid his cousin to shoot him. Just bizarre stuff. And that's a case that would be pending. So he's not going anywhere. And the other issue we should say is that the court ruling, the Supreme Court, while significant and while upending his conviction, doesn't mean he will be retried again. That's a function not of the judges in the Supreme Court who ruled 5-0 that you can't inflame jurors like this or taint jurors like this. It's up to the actual prosecutors to make the determination as to whether to do a retrial. But certainly as a result of this decision, that's what the court said he must get.
So as those prosecutors are weighing this, I mentioned a moment ago the amount of content that was generated by this entire case in the form of documentaries and limited series and stuff like that. How do you pick a jury? How do you find a jury pool that hasn't heard about this case or that can weigh in on this case without having any impressions of Alex Murdaugh or his family or any of the entire affair?
So what happens, and this is very critical, what happens is when you select a jury, the calculus and analysis is not whether you've heard about the case, do you have an opinion about the case, what do you think about the case, what are your views about the case, how much of YouTube did you see it on, how much did you watch CNN? The issue is, sir or ma'am, could you agree to put that aside and evaluate the case based upon what you hear in the courtroom, based upon what you see in the courtroom, based upon the evidence that is presented? And if it's presented strongly enough, do you agree, sir, ma'am, to vote for the prosecution because you'd conclude that he's guilty? In the event, however, that you conclude that the evidence in the courtroom, not based on your opinion, is of a value that it doesn't establish his guilt, he'd be not guilty. Could you agree with that? So that's really the analysis when you're selecting a juror. Unless you're under a rock nowadays, Boris, you've heard something because we are in such a social media sensationalized society. If you're not watching it on TV, it's certainly there, right? And so I think that if there is a retrial, that certainly is going to factor into it. And if a juror says, no, I have opinions, he's guilty, they're not going to be paneled because they're going to be challenged for cause. In the event, however, that a jury concludes that, you know what, I'm good and everybody has their opinion, I have mine, I could serve, then they'll serve. But this is an important decision, and I should also briefly note that the court was somewhat concerned also because the case became all about his financial crimes, and it was sort of like, wait a minute, are we on trial for murder of his two family members, or is this a case about financial fraud? And so the court, in its analysis and an opinion, said you got to limit that, court, moving forward. Yes, you can put some of that out there, but when does it become a case about he's a bad guy, convict him, as opposed to he's a murderer, because that's what we're here for. Always have to keep your eye on the prize when you have a case before court and before a jury.
And a case like this one, especially, the saga continues. Joey Jackson, thanks so much.